Hello. Right then, so welcome to what is Four Random Books number 7. 8 if you count the special patron one. Which I do to an extent, but it was a thank you for the patrons. So, today's theme is Dunkirk. Today's Four Random Books. Well, to be honest, actually, it starts off with one book, because this is the book which fell out on my head. Which is why I said, well, that's basically starting off what Four Random Books are going to be about for this episode. And I have got 4 quite fun books. But this one is Major General Julian Thompson's Dunkirk Retreat to Victory. Now, Julian Thompson is, of course, the commander of 3rd Commando Brigade in the Falklands War. So he knows a thing or two about amphibious warfare and about commanding in tight circumstances. Just a tad. And he gives a really cool book. It's got lovely maps. It's got beautiful pictures. And it's just well written. It's a lovely thing to read. And it has things in here which you don't really get sometimes from some of the other narratives. By the time the 30th Brigade convoy docked at Calais on the afternoon of the 23rd of May, the 1st Panzer Division was closing in on the town. Leading elements had reached but not yet taken Le Colombier and had driven 3rd Royal Tank Regiment almost back to Coquilles. Unbeknown to Nicholson, the 1st Panzer Division was ordered not to push on towards Calais, but to bypass it and head for Dunkirk, leaving the 10th Panzer Division to take Calais. The 10th Panzer Division had actually been pulled out of Guderian's 19th Panzer Corps to refit, leaving him with 2 divisions. The 1st Division, which in Guderian's opinion should make short work of such a lightly defended town as Calais before heading off for Dunkirk, and the 2nd Panzer Division, already attacking at Boulogne. But when the British unexpectedly reinforced Calais, the 10th Panzer Division was hastily hauled back from refitting to deal with this new threat, while the 1st Panzer Division was told to make straight for Gravelines and Dunkirk. But although Nicholson was not privy to this reasoning at high level in the German camp, he was absolutely clear that there was no question of moving to Boulogne or to Saint-Omer. His most urgent task was to defend Calais. He ordered the 1st RB to hold the outer ramparts on the east side of the town, and the 2nd KRRC to do the same on the west side. Advanced posts of the Queen's Victoria Rifles and anti-aircraft units were deployed forward of the ramparts. Having just given his orders, Nicholson was instructed by War Office to take some 350,000 rations for the BAF to Dunkirk, and was told that this task was to be treated as overriding all other considerations. Calais contained one of the biggest ration dumps in France, and these orders came direct from General Ironside, the Commander-in-Chief Staff. Although, as related in Chapter 5, Gort did not make this decision to withdraw from Ypres to Dunkirk until the 25th of May, 2 days hence. Ironside, on assessing the situation, had come to the conclusion that the BAF might have to resort to retreating in this direction. If the ration convoy was to get through, it had to go as soon as possible, with tanks and carriers to clear the way before the 1st Panzer Division blocked the Calais-Dunkirk road at Marques. Nicholson took some infantry from the perimeter defence and sent them to pick at the first part of the road to Dunkirk, 20 miles away, while the convoy was being formed. A patrol of 1 cruiser and 3 light tanks of B Squadron 3rd RTR under Major Rees was sent ahead of the infantry. The 10th Panzer Division had by now come up from the south, occupied high ground overlooking Calais, and started shelling the town. I could carry on. It's a great book. It's really, really worth a read. And frankly, Julian Thompson writes some exceptional books. This one is definitely one of them. Joshua Levine, Forgotten Voices of Dunkirk, in association with the Imperial Museum. It's one of those books which is part of a sort of series, the Forgotten Voices series, and I like some of them. Some of them I think are a bit... I think they've kind of selected the Forgotten Voices. Yeah, they're good. And it has some really cool quote pictures in, but also mostly it's made up, of course, of quotes from people who were there. Captain Peter Barclay, 2nd Battalion, Royal Norfolk Regiment. With the heroic display of his and the good work done by the rest of Sergeant Major Gristock's turney party, the 2 enemy groups that had crossed the canal were disposed of. Then the reserve company of my own battalion came up and made good that right flank. I think I passed out then, and next thing I know, I remember I was in a first aid post with Bristock, who was in a very bad state, but not so bad that he didn't appreciate some jellified brandy pills that we were given. That cheered him up. They were delicious and very welcome. From there, I was evacuated, and so was Gristock. Jellified brandy pills. Actually, Peter Barclay gets a few discussions in this. That's a good one. Second Lieutenant Ian English, 8th Battalion, Durham Light Infantry. We were under constant attack, and the brigadier ordered that the battalion should withdraw as it was running up against opposition which was very much greater than it could cope with. But it was some hours after that we actually withdrew. We went back the way we come, to Vimy, which we reached around 5 in the morning. At Vimy we moved further along the ridge to Givenchy, where we took up defensive positions. The next day was fairly quiet. Then at about 3 the following morning we were ordered to withdraw to Carbon. It was extremely slow going. The roads were absolutely packed with vehicles and refugees. We then got word from our signals office that a French Algerian division was manning the La Brassy Canal and were very hard pressed. I was sent into Cavan to report to the French at their divisional headquarters. There must have been a dozen or more French officers, all poring over maps on the table and everyone talking at once. I stood there with the liaison officer for a moment. Then somebody saw us and there was a tremendous excitement. Ah, bravo, les Anglais! It's always a funny thing in a historian's life when you realize that a large number of the people you're reading about who were involved in a major thing like a war, you're actually older than they were. Corporal Charles Burt Nash, 2nd Bulk Petrol Transport Company, Royal Army Service Corps. Having bought 5 tanker loads of petrol to the Calais Mark Airdrome, I was rudely awoken at 4 o'clock in the morning by the sound of shells. A quick investigation revealed that on the horizon, silhouetted against the dawn skyline, was a row of black objects. These turned out to be enemy tanks, and they were firing at the aerodrome. I roused the men. I must admit, I didn't quite know what to do. I certainly wasn't expecting to do this sort of thing. The situation was resolved for me when the colonel of an engineer unit turned up. He said, "Who's in charge of these water tankers?" I said, "I am in charge of these 5 vehicles. But they're not water tanks. They are loaded. They are petrol tankers, and they contain 100-octane aviation fuel." To my amazement, he said, "Goody, goody, just what I can use." He then said, "Corporal, I want you to tell your men to open the cocks on your tanks and flood the petrol out on the ground. We're setting fire to this bloody place. There are Jerry over there, and they're not going to get hold of anything while I'm around." I said, "Excuse me, sir. Do I get you right? You want me to cascade petrol all over the floor, and you're going to set on fire the vehicles and cargo?" He said, "That's right, Corporal. Can you give me a signature for this?" He said, "Who the bloody hell do you think you're talking to? I'm a colonel, and you'll do as you're bloody well told. I'm also instructing you to take your men and whatever you can salvage from their personal belongings and go to the town of Dunkirk. The British Army is pulling out of France." Yeah, that's Colonel. Anyone ever watched Bluestone 4-2 will recognise that tone of a colonel. Then there's the oldie but goodie, Robert Jackson's Dunkirk, the British evacuation in 1940. First published in 1976, this version in 2004. And it's a good one. To make matters worse, there was no possibility of using the main harbour with its 7 dock basins. This had already been blocked by air attack on 20th of May. And if it had not been for the action of the Admiral Abrel, who had ordered several merchantmen and French naval craft out to sea as soon as the attacks began, the blockage would certainly have been much worse. As it was, only 2 main embarkation points were left in Dunkirk itself, a jetty to the west of the harbour, and the jetty de l'Est, or Eastmont, a strong wooden structure thrusting out northwest into the sea from the Promenade de la Ligue, a 900-yard stone causeway bounding the canal mouth on the north side. Although 1,400 yards long, the mole itself was extremely narrow, measuring about 5 feet across for most of the length. It was to defy every attempt by the Luftwaffe and the German artillery to destroy it, and in the event, most of the troops who embarked via Dunkirk harbour passed along it. It's annoying when people make targets so small. It was clear the operation was going to be a job for small craft, boats capable of running a ferry service from beaches to ships offshore, and ships with shallow enough draft to enable them to negotiate the obstacle-ridden waters in and around Dunkirk harbour. Destroyers were vital to Ramsay's plans, although far from ideal as troop ships. They could take their quota of men, and their speed and manoeuvrability would make them difficult targets to hit. Moreover, their firepower would prove an invaluable asset, particularly in the anti-aircraft role. The problem was that in May 1940, destroyers were fast becoming worth more than their weight in gold. Of the 220 on the Royal Navy's infantry at the time, the majority were in the Mediterranean or Far East, and many of those serving in the Home Fleet were heavily committed in the Norwegian campaign. The withdrawal of destroyers, and to a lesser extent cruisers, from the Home Fleet for service with the Nor and Nova Command was a serious step, at a time when the protection of Atlantic shipping routes was fast becoming vital to the survival of Britain. But it was a risk that had to be taken. Fortunately, although the British did not know it at the time, the losses suffered by the German Navy off Norway had been extensive enough to prevent any forays into the Atlantic by enemy surface vessels for some time to come. Speaking as a naval historian who does know how many destroyers were around the world, I'm not sure why he thinks so many were in the Far East. There were a fair number in the Mediterranean, there were some in the Red Sea, but we're talking east of Suez, there can't be more than 30. Any more than that, especially not modern destroyers. There probably were a few more than that once you're calling harbour defence destroyers, which are pretty much sloops, but very old World War One destroyers and these things. That's not a lot of vessels. The vast majority of the Royal Navy's destroyers were in Norway or taking up the convoy slack in the Atlantic, which was started off quite early. Remember, the corvettes and things don't come into service that quickly, so destroyers are what are doing the job. But it's still a good book to read. And this is what I feel made a movie. Air Battle for Dunkirk, 26th of May to 3rd of June 1940. Now, the RAF often gets some flack about Dunkirk, whether they were there, what they were doing, all those things. They were trying to intercept the enemy before they reached Dunkirk. They weren't always successful. In fact, they were often not. But that doesn't mean they didn't try very hard, and when they got the chance, they didn't do very well. They did have their hands tied behind them a bit in the back because of fear of the forthcoming Battle of Britain, which would be a naval and air campaign. Let's be honest. The whole reason you need air dominance is if you're Nazi Germany was to get across the sea and try and stop the Navy stopping you. And as long as you have naval dominance, you can stop them really achieving air dominance because they can't take out your airfields permanently. And especially not when your airfields are mostly grass fields. They can drop a bomb on them, but it's not like there's a huge runway you can pelter. Apart from for the heavy bombers, unfortunately. But they tended to base from further away as well. The lull from midday till 4 was only broken by 3 small actions in the mid-afternoon. 111, 151, 117, and 609 squadrons were on patrol, and each had brief encounters. John Thompson's Hurricanes saw nothing. But Flight Lieutenant Peter Powell had taken off late because of engine trouble and engaged the lone DO-17 5,000 feet over Dunkirk. He attacked, but observed no damage before it escaped. Leading 111 and 151 was Teddy Donaldson. He saw a single Ju-88 about to bomb some ships towards the end of the patrol time and emptied his guns into it. Shortage of fuel forced him to give up the chase, but it had been driven off. The other 2 squadrons, 17 and 609, were also in action. 17 had flown to Manson, landing at midday. Sergeant Sewell being delayed by engine trouble. Another engine trouble, so they took off for their afternoon patrol with 9 aircraft. Joining up with 609 Spitfires, 609 too were down to 9 aircraft. Flying at 9,000 feet, 17 squadrons saw a Ju-88 3,000 feet below, 5 miles offshore, and 5 Hurricanes dive to the attack, but to no effect. The 88 returned fire from their rear gunner, scoring hits on Flight Lieutenant Toynes and Pilot Officer Ken Manger's machines. Another 88 was attacked by Pilot Officer Whitaker, but this too escaped inland. The Spitfire pilots become split up, and Flight Lieutenant Hack Russell's section was reduced to just himself and Flying Officer A.R. Paul, Edge, when a number 3 was lost in a turn. As they were looking for him, a lone ME-1110 surprised them from behind to fire into Russell's aircraft. Edge saw it surrounded by bursting shells and tracer before it began a long, slow spiral into the sea. Edge took on the 110, and in a head-on attack in which it seemed to the British pilot that the German was intent on ramming him, Edge scored hits on the 110, which went vertically down to the sea. In 609 squadron history, it crashed, but the RAF only credited a probable victory, probably because it was not seen by another pilot to go into the sea. It's fuel. It's the same thing which worked against the Germans in the Battle of Britain was working against the RAF in the Battle of Dunkirk. It's the reason why they build a forward operating base in San Carlos Bay in the Falklands War. So to extend the fuel of the aircraft. Anyway, hope you enjoyed those 4 books. I have gone a little bit over time, but hope you enjoyed it. And thank you for watching.